All right, we are live. Welcome back, everybody. This is episode 138 of the Calibrated live show with your host, of course, Scott. I am Scott. Welcome in, everybody. We have some distracting events going on today, and here to talk about it from the New Atlas YouTube channel, the one, the only, Brian Berletic. Brian, how are you doing today, my good man?
I'm doing well, and you already scheduled me to come on ahead of time, and it was just perfect timing that this theater is unfolding. Well, semi theater is unfolding, and I think it's good timing because we really have to talk about this, and I see so many otherwise intelligent people reacting emotionally to this when there needs to be some deeper thinking going on.
Yeah, this is something that I've often referred to when talking about any analysis. The very first thing you should do is remove any and all emotion and as much bias as you possibly can immediately. Maybe let it seep in a little bit later, because there are beneficial things to a bias or some emotion to a analysis. But when something is unfolding, reacting emotionally immediately to that information is usually the least beneficial route forward to actually achieve good analysis. And yes, I have also seen throughout today a number of people who should otherwise probably think twice about what they're saying, not thinking twice because it's right in front of them. It's there. The clicks are available, whatever it is. People are going after this tooth and nail. For those who don't know, for those who are just tuning in from underneath their rock, Zelensky and Trump had a meeting today in Washington. That meeting did not go particularly well. It kind of goes in line with what I have been talking about. I know it goes directly in line with what Brian Berletic has been talking about. Brian, I want a full rundown of the conversation that took place today in Washington, in the White House, between J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, and Volodymyr Zelensky. I want to hear your take on it. I want to hear what you think is going to come out of this conversation. And just all your thoughts. Go ahead. Take it away.
The first thing to keep in mind is 2 out of the 3 people in the conversation are accomplished actors. I'm just going to put that out there. I don't know if it's connected or not, but just keep in mind, Zelensky was a comedian and actor in TV shows and movies back in Ukraine, and they deliberately picked him to groom him as a candidate for president to play on his popularity as an entertainer. And President Trump had a reality TV show, which, despite the word reality being in there, is highly scripted, edited to make compelling TV. For 14 seasons, he was the host of his reality TV show, The Apprentice. And he also participated regularly in professional wrestling, which is not actual competition. The matches are predetermined. It's entertainment. And alongside the competitions, there's always this in and outer ring drama. And President Trump participated in that quite often. So keep all of that in mind. They're not strangers to staging confrontations, disagreements to advance a narrative. So anyway, it didn't even make sense to me that President Zelensky was traveling to Washington in the first place. There was nothing to talk about or discuss or even sign off on. I was listening to Alexander Mikyurs of the Duran talking about this so-called minerals deal, and there is nothing. There's nothing in the deal to even agree on. It's not even really fair to call it a deal. It is so vague and ambiguous. The terms don't make any sense at all. And the very premise of it, the U.S., and this is just what we hear the U.S. president saying, the U.S. wants its money back from investing in Ukraine in this conflict that is ultimately a U.S. proxy war against Russia. So they want Ukraine to pay for America's own proxy war against Russia. Does that even add up at face value? I don't think that it does. And so why were they meeting in the first place? It makes no sense, except to put on this performance and convince the Russians that there is this deep fallout between Ukraine and the US, and to try to convince Russia against their better judgment to trust the US ever again, and just step into the breaching, be betrayed and undermined, and have the rug pulled out from under them again. Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Istanbul, all the arms control treaties, one of which President Trump actually unilaterally withdrew from during his first administration. And the most amazing thing to me was that as they were arguing with each other, because Zelensky basically, he was demanding the US support him, continue fighting on in this proxy war. And President Trump was demanding Zelensky thank him. And then he brought up the javelins again, which is so ironic because under the Trump administration, the first administration, his sending weapons to Ukraine was almost certainly the last red line crossed that convinced Russia that this was irreversible, that Ukraine was being transformed into a battering ram aimed straight at Russia. And if they did not act sooner rather than later, this would become a military threat, a national security threat, an existential threat to Russia in the future. And that is why they launched this special military operation. So many people are blaming this, including President Trump, are blaming this on the Biden administration. He played an equal role in preparing and precipitating this conflict. So I think that's a pretty good explanation. Mike, leaving anything else, Scott?
No, I don't think so. To your point, I actually went and read through at least parts of like the majority of the deal that I could get my hands on, and yeah, it's so weird for both sides, really. For the U.S., it's only new investment basically. So in terms of like the 50% that they're going to get until the debt or whatever, the grant, whatever you want to call it, is paid back. That only comes from new like claims basically on the rare earth minerals and stuff like that. So already you're talking about a very small amount of money that I believe the US would be able to get out of this. I mean, I would be surprised if they got 50 billion out of Ukraine over, a 2-year period, let alone the 500 billion that they're talking about. But not only that, it is basically nothing for Zelensky. So the entire reason he's there, one of the reasons that you brought up that they're fighting, is these security guarantees. One thing that nobody's talking about is Ukraine already has like 30 plus security guarantees from multiple European nations. Estonia, all of these countries have bought into this security guarantee idea, along with England, who has a 100-year security guarantee with Zelensky. But what nobody talks about is these security guarantees don't really matter either. So, I mean, for a security guarantee to work, the other side, the guarantor, has to show up. And I don't know if Europe is going to do that. If the clauses of the security guarantee are procced. But with no security guarantees, no military, funding, nothing like this, it just appeared as though Zelensky was going to bend the knee to Trump and sell out Ukraine. I made a tweet about it. I basically said, Zelensky's getting, he's going to kiss the ring and he's going to get nothing out of it. That didn't end up happening because of the complete farce, I don't know what you would even call it, that transpired in the Oval Office in front of the press corps. But are you buying it? Are you buying this argument that they had? Well,
something else for people to consider, people who are skeptical and who really think some real fallout is that just think about the last time the US created a puppet and then ever cared what they actually really had to say and would genuinely react to what a powerless puppet said to them. And the answer is never. It's never happened. And if someone becomes an obstacle to US interests regarding the manipulation and self-destruction of a targeted country, they will simply remove that person and replace them with somebody else. So if this was a real fallout, Zelensky will be gone. And they will continue doing what they have planned to do. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has publicly said this. He has laid out the entire plan. There's not going to be peace with Russia. They're trying to lure Russia in and trick them again, the Minsk 3, even though he literally said this is not Minsk 3.0, but he described what is literally Minsk 3.0, where European forces go into Ukraine, freeze the conflict along the current line of contact, and they just hold on to it while the US and Europe expand military industrial production, the manufacturing of arms and ammunition, and also while the US rushes to try to contain China. I don't think people quite understand how far China has accelerated out of the orbit of the US-led so-called international order. Now, the whole mineral deal, which doesn't make any sense if you look at it, is really just a ploy. There are no minerals to be had. Ukraine doesn't even have energy. So how are they extracting all of these rare earth minerals for the US? It doesn't make any sense at face value. What it is a trick to convince Trump supporters that if the US continues supporting Ukraine, even indirectly sending weapons to Europe, who then send it to Ukraine, which is literally what they're talking about doing, they will feel better because they think they're going to be getting their tax dollars back as part of this deal. You're not getting your tax dollars back. Actually, taxes will be increasing because the tariffs are a form of tax on the American people, the American consumer. So people have to understand that part of it. And then President Trump just the other day was talking about what does Ukraine get out of the mineral deal? They get the right to fight on, and they will get continued support. If Russia doesn't make a foolish, ridiculous deal with the US, they will continue fighting on. The US will continue backing them, which was always the plan. You know, they're just seeing if Russia is foolish enough to agree to something that puts them at a disadvantage. And if they don't, they will continue the proxy war through Europe while they double down on China. And Secretary Hegseth even literally said Europe needs to double down on Ukraine. Does that sound like an administration interested in ending this war or perpetuating it under the cover of pursuing peace? And I see people in the comment section. They're skeptical, but ask yourself, why are you skeptical? Because the evidence really adds up in favor of what you want to believe, or just because you really, really want to believe it, rather than what the facts are adding up to. You know, you should honestly ask yourself that question. It's not as if myself or Scott don't want to see this conflict end. We've been covering it closer than most people. We've watched with our own eyes the horrors taking place on the battlefield. This is one of the most highly documented close-up wars in human history. I would love to see this whole conflict come to an end. But we have to be realistic, and we have to make sure we're not promoting a course of action that's actually going to expand the conflict, either vis-a-vis Russia or vis-a-vis China, because the exact same conflict is being teed up by this administration, handed off to them from the previous administration, the exact same type of conflict vis-a-vis China.
Yeah, the part that I want to just try to get into people's brains, and me and Brian had a quick conversation before this whole live stream started. I said, Brian, people are not going to be very happy with the direction we're going to go with this, because me and Brian agree very similarly on what we see happening. And Brian has been a little bit of an influence, obviously, talking to me. So we're on the same track. But time and time again, the things that Brian says and the things that I echo sometimes from Brian tend to come true. And what I've been saying specifically since about New Year's, and even a little bit before that, and Brian's been saying for longer, is that the US is going to pivot, Europe is going to have to take over, and the war is going to continue. And I said that the second Trump came out and said day one negotiations. I told all of you listening, no, I said, first off, there's no way he gets it done in one day. Not feasible, just communication wise. But outside of that, the US has geostrategic interests that it cannot back down from if it wants to maintain its hegemony. Does anybody here think that Donald Trump is going to be the president that is going to willfully retreat from US hegemony? Absolutely not. He would probably be killed if he went through that process. I mean, that is going against the entire US establishment right now. We want to be number one. We're going to continue to fight to be number one, and we will not give it up, hegemony or nothing. So when we're saying just wait until you see this conflict not come to an end, because Trump is not going to end it, and just wait because the U.S. is not going to back off of support for Ukraine in a wider picture. The way, they might not be announcing billions of dollars of aid going directly to Ukraine, but Europe can still buy U.S. weapon systems, U.S. artillery shells, U.S. produced equipment, and send that to Ukraine under the guise of it being European funding and security, right? So the U.S. removes itself, it pivots, it can focus on Iran and China, and the meanwhile, the Russians are continuously distracted by the European control over the Ukraine project. Do I have that right, Brian? Because it makes perfect logical sense to me, and I don't think that I have seen anything that goes against that hasn't turned out to be complete and total theater.
Very good point. Yes, absolutely. Look at this tiff between America and Europe for about a week or so. Secretary Hegseth laid out the plan, and he said, "This is what you're going to do. You're going to double down on Ukraine, and we're going to go after China. It's a division of labor." He literally said a division of labor between Europe and America. He didn't say a split. He didn't say peace in Ukraine. He said a division of labor. You guys hold on to Ukraine while we take care of China. We'll be back. That's what he said publicly to everybody. And Europe and America, they were calling each other names. They were fighting publicly for about a week. And then Ursula von der Leyen, whatever her position is, I don't even know, the head president of the EU or something, she was announcing how the EU is going to double down on producing arms and ammunition and supporting Ukraine. So she is complying to Secretary Hegseth's directive after pretending there was this huge divide, this split between the US and Europe. And that's all meant to draw Russia in. And I don't know if Russia is really falling for it or not. I follow Russian media, and Russian media is very enthusiastic about all of this, and they're feeding into it. But what is that? I don't know. I'm hoping, and you should never hope because you're almost always going to be disappointed, but I'm hoping that they're just going along with this. I hope there's nobody in Moscow who's going to believe this again. Now, some people are saying they don't think this conversation between Zelensky, Trump, and Vance was staged. And maybe it wasn't. I mean, I've met people high up who actually believe everything the U.S. says, no matter how many times the U.S. betrays them. And maybe in Zelensky's mind, he honestly believed he was special and that the West had his back for as long as it takes. But as we know, the plan before any of this even began was always to burn Ukraine to the ground to extend Russia. And I hate to do this. I do it almost every single time I do a video. But read the 2019 Rand Corporation paper titled Extending Russia. And the plan was to light fires all along Russia's periphery, in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Armenia, in Kazakhstan, in Syria, light as many fires as possible, force Russia to expend resources, trying to put them all out, hopefully overextending themselves and collapsing. The goal has always been to overthrow the political order in Moscow and subordinate Russia to the US. Still is. And if you read under the first geopolitical measure, provide lethal aid to Ukraine, which is followed by arm the Syrian rebels. And we see how that all ended. They talk about the benefits, but they also talk about the risk. And the risk was such a move might also come at a significant cost to Ukraine and to US prestige and credibility. This could produce disproportionately large Ukrainian casualties, which it has, territorial losses, absolutely irreversible, I would add, and refugee flows. It might even lead Ukraine into a disadvantageous peace. So this is where we're at. This was always part of the plan, create a disposable battering ram. They've used this battering ram, has run its course. Now's the part where they dispose of it. That's what we're watching right now.
Yeah, and it's crazy because I laugh because you bring up these Rand papers almost obsessively, but for very good reason, right? I know that everybody's going to roll their eyes out of the Rand papers, but it's telling you exactly what is happening. Like,
yes,
shot for shot, it happened in Syria. It happened. It's continuing to happen in Ukraine. It is likely going to spread, and it's going to affect the Asian theater as well. So just I hate to hop on the old Rand paper bandwagon, but it's there. They're telling you exactly what they're going to do. Pete Hegseth told you exactly what he was going to do a month ago. Me and Brian do not have special powers. We are not psychic. We do not see the future. It's none of that. We just listen to what they say. That's all we do. We read and we listen to what they say. And that usually points you exactly in the right direction. Now, Brian.
Yes. I just wanted to say regarding the think tank papers, this is like a billionaire is developing a piece of property, and people are like, what is this guy doing? We know he's up to no good. And he says, I'm building an orphanage for children. It's for the children. And people are like, it really looks like a nuclear waste dump to me. And they pick up the blueprint and it literally says toxic waste dump. And he keeps telling people that it's an orphanage for children. And then at the end of the day, it ends up being a toxic waste dump because they're following the blueprint. That's what the think tanks are. They produce the blueprints, which are taken by lobbyists to Washington, be signed off on by both sides. And no matter who is in the White House, no matter who is in Congress, this is what always happens, which is why I obsess over the thing. Like the Which Path to Persia Brookings paper from 2009, literally every single thing they wrote in that paper has been tried and or achieved. And the same goes for this Rand Corporation paper. So really, people are ignoring these papers at their own peril. They're parsing through political rhetoric and ignoring the actual blueprint, just like the people in that village were believing the billionaire that it was an orphanage when all along it was obviously a toxic waste dump.
So now that we've established what we believe has happened in this conversation, and by the way, just a housekeeping, guys, all of I see all of your questions. I'm very thankful. We're going to get to those at the end. Me and Brian are just going to get through our little conversation and then we'll hit all of those questions. So thank you for asking them. Now that we've established what we think has happened, how do you see the progression going forward? Do you think Zelensky comes crawling back to Trump to sign a deal and make it work out? And, there's going to be the rift. It's going to be there, but the things are going to at least be okay. And then Europe takes over and we just see a continuation of the war. Do you think they're going to actually seek a ceasefire, which again, we've discussed is probably not the best for Russia, but we've seen Russia get baited into these agreements before in the past. I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility that it happens again. How do you see the progression of the conflict now after today's events?
Well, theater aside, whether it's, all the participants realize it's theater or not, theater aside, yes, Europe is going to continue backing Ukraine. They want to try to lure Russia into a ceasefire. And the way they're doing this is by pretending so much so that they want peace and they want to stop this, especially America, and pretending that there's some sort of divide, even though the only thing being divided is the labor of American empire. They want to at least put Russia in a difficult position where America is so convincingly pursuing peace. For Russia to say no to a ceasefire would make Russia look like an aggressor. And that might be the way they're trying to trap or box in Russia. But in reality, they'll get Russia to do this, and then Europe will pretend to unilaterally continue backing Ukraine and maybe even send in troops. And the US will say, look, we really want peace. We don't want nuclear war. Please don't attack the Europeans. We told them not to. They did it anyway. For the sake of peace, can you just let them freeze the conflict like they did in Syria? And then it's just a matter of waiting. And then the US hopes, I don't think they'll succeed, but they hope, and you should never underestimate them. They hope that over the course of several years, they can close the disparity that has formed between the US and Europe and Russia and China in terms of military industrial output, not just the quantity of weapons, but also the quality. There's a disparity growing between the quality of weapons between East and West. So this is what they're doing. They're desperate to achieve this. They see that global hegemony is fading. They see forces around the world that are able to pursue an alternate vision of the future, multipolarism, and they will do anything necessary to stop it. They're not looking for a seat at the multipolar table.
Yeah.
America is not President Trump. It's not the president. It's not even Congress. It is the special interests that determine the policy that is sent to everyone in Congress and in the White House via lobbyists. The people who paid for both President Trump's campaign and also Kamala Harris's campaign during the last election. People have to keep that in mind.
Yeah. And just another aspect that I was thinking about, another piece that fits so perfectly to this whole puzzle is the fact that Europe now is facing out of necessity, massive increase to military spending. This is going to have large effects on the social welfare spending that they do. It's going to have effects across Europe in a way that I don't think Europeans are going to be very happy about. And I think that this is another perfect excuse. We have to do this because Trump is turning his back on us. Meanwhile, Europe is still Europe is NATO, America is NATO, trade is still continuing, nothing really changes. But now Europe is forced because of Trump, big bad Trump. Now we have to do all of this military spending. Now we have to fully support Ukraine, and you have to be on board with it because we don't have a choice. We have to transition into this sort of footing now. And again, it's just another piece of this whole thing that just fits so conveniently with the plans that we've been talking about this entire time. I don't see how people can ignore it at this point anymore. After you've seen it progressively continue. And I get it, everybody. I wish that this was coming to an end. Brian had just talked about that. I don't think anybody, and this is weird because we do this for most of our work, right? I mean, or our hobby, at least. We spend a lot of time sitting here focused on this, writing about this, talking about this. And I think me and Brian have discussed, we would be more than happy if it just ended right now. If it ended in a way that ensured that it stayed done for forever, right? If Ukraine can have peace, Russia can have peace, and the West can stay out of it, I think we all can agree that that is exactly what we want. But again, the reality just is not there for that to work out. And this is what I was specifically saying. The US's position, Europe's position, Ukraine's position, and Russia's position are just completely on opposite sides of the world from each other. And not only Russia. I mean, it's so funny throughout this entire day, Russia wasn't even talked about. It was the overarching focus of all of this. Russia's the aggressor, Russia's to blame. But I don't think anybody even said a single word about Russia. I don't think anybody said anything about what the Russians require out of negotiations. I don't think they asked what the Russians thought about the rare earth deal, because they simply don't care. It's what the US wants. It's what Europe wants and NATO, what they want. It's what Ukraine wants. And then lastly, it's what the Russians want. And you're never going to achieve peace negotiating in that way. I don't think peace wants to be I don't think anybody wants peace to be achieved, really. And I don't think it's going to happen. So again, me and Brian have stuck by what we have said for the past 6 months, past year and a half, actually, basically since the Russians mobilized. We've been saying the same thing, and it has continuously worked out. So I don't know why anybody expects change to happen now, just because some guys got in a fight in an office, right?
Yeah.
Why would it change the overarching geostrategic plans that are already in motion? It wouldn't.
Yes, and the point that you made, I think, is worth repeating. This whole U.S.-EU divide is precisely because the U.S. publicly tasked Europe with expanding military industrial production and support for Ukraine, doubling support for Ukraine. And the only way for Europe to do that is, just as you say, slash social programs and redirect it to the military industrial complex. And the only way they can sell that to the European peoples by making them so upset about big bad Trump and the evil Americans turning their back on poor defenseless Ukraine and making people emotional enough to want to make that sacrifice, or to at least tolerate it as it takes place. The second point I wanted to make was, as you were saying, Scott, there is a root cause to this conflict, and it's called NATO expansion up to and along Russia's border. The plan was always to eventually not just absorb the nations along Russia's border, but to absorb Russia itself. That is the whole plan. It always has been. It still is. And this is what Russia is reacting to. And so if you're not going to talk about NATO, you're not serious about ending the conflict. And I have not heard, I have heard the Trump administration talk about NATO, talking about expanding European spending on NATO. The US isn't going to cut spending on NATO. They're asking Europe to spend 5% of their GDP on NATO. So does that sound like someone interested in getting to the root of the conflict and ending it? The answer is obviously no. And if you cannot see that, it's because you don't want to see it. It's there. And finally, I wanted to say the only reason Russia would ever agree to any of this is if Russia is overextended more than maybe we might realize. We don't sit in on conversations in the Kremlin. We don't know how good or bad things actually are. We can only discern from what is available publicly. Look at what happened in Syria. They were overextended to the point where they could not continue propping up Syria in the face of U.S. proxy war. So they would possibly agree to it to buy time, hoping, just as they did between Minsk I and Minsk II, buying time in the hope that they could use that time better than the Americans and Europeans to rearm, reorganize, further expand military industrial production, prepare their society for the next round of encroachment and aggression, proxy war. That's the only scenario I can see Russia agreeing to it, because if they do agree to it, you have to wonder why. Are they really that gullible, or is there more to it? I believe they bought into Minsk knowing that it was never going to be upheld, because they needed more time to prepare for the special military operation they were sure was going to be necessary. Scott, your mic.
Sorry. Just on a personal, personal opinion note, the funniest part of the entire interaction was Trump openly stating that the javelins that he delivered during his term, because Zelensky made a mention of being alone, being left alone or something like that. And that's what I think Trump got offended by, because he delivered military equipment, lethal military equipment to the Ukrainians in preparation for the exact war that we are watching unfold right now. Now, I don't know if it was necessarily Trump, because I don't think Trump was always at the helm when all this was going on during his first administration. I think that the Neocon players behind the scenes were sending all of this stuff, making sure it happened. The Ukraine project was moving ahead even while Trump was in office. But he openly admits that they were sending lethal aid, but more than Barack Obama was sending. He was increasing the aid, and that aid was used to destroy Russian tanks the way it was intended. It is an unbelievable omission to just come out and brag about. We gave you this years before it was supposed to be used, and you used it, and you should be grateful that we did that for you. Another aspect of this entire thing that I think is completely hilarious, and people just seem to be completely missing this point, is that you're watching Zelensky, twitch and sit there and not be very happy and disgruntled and talking back or whatever, however you want to describe it. He was the one who was told to do this exact thing. He would not probably be in this war if the U.S. wouldn't have said, hey, you need to keep doing this. You need to keep pushing the blinds here. You need to do this. You need to do this. You need to talk about, separating from Russia and joining the EU and joining NATO. This was a U.S. plan. It was a European plan that was basically forced upon the proxy Ukraine as a battering ram to just be destroyed. So for them to sit there and to be saying, hey, you need to be thankful for us pushing you into oblivion it's just the peak essence of what the United States and our foreign policy is unequivocally about. And I saw somebody leave a comment saying something like, does Brian hate America? And my answer to that is no. Yeah, right here. Does Brian hate America? No, Brian doesn't hate America. Brian lived in America. Brian served the American country in our armed forces. Brian is more of an American than most of the Americans talking about America. And yet, what Brian wants is for the US to do the right thing, the moral thing, the correct thing, still be the greatest country in the world, but do it in a way that doesn't send 1 million Ukrainians into a slaughter, right? 1 million, or Arvin, we can talk about all of the proxies that the US has used, abused, and abandoned. The Arvin, South Vietnam, the ANA, the Afghan National Army, the Kurds. We are about to leave Syria, and the Turks are going to roll over the Kurds. Again, an ally that we said we were going to be there for. We armed them. We told them to go to war. And then as soon as we need to be there for them, we drop. So this is just a continuation of that. And no, Brian does not hate America. No, Aiden does not, or Scott does not hate America. We want America to be better, and we want Americans to be informed. If we hated America, we'd probably be doing this podcast in Chinese, because we would not care about the American audience. We want English-speaking individuals to pay attention to what their government is doing right in front of their face. That's all.
I would add that you mentioned Chinese people don't hate America. Russian people don't hate America. Most people around the world don't hate America. They hate the American government, because they can see that is the problem. They can see the American people are the very first victims of the American government. And then American foreign policy victimizes the rest of the planet. Who can look the last, just however old you are, just look at the last 10, 20 years of American foreign policy under both Trump, Biden, Obama, Bush. Look at the foreign policy and tell me, what is there not to hate about American foreign policy? It is rapacious. It is murderous. It is exploitative. It is deceit. It is the single biggest threat to peace and stability and prosperity, not just on Earth in general, but also back in America. Look at what is happening to the American economy. If you were to ask me, Brian, well, what should America do? America should stop playing empire, and they should invest inward inside America. It has 2 huge oceans on both sides of its coasts. Nobody is invading America. If you invested inward in your country, you rebuilt your industrial base, you took your resources, including your human resources, developed them properly rather than simply fleecing the American public especially, you would not have all of these dynamics that you see. The rising cost of living in America is because American companies sent production overseas, to China specifically, especially, and China is now capable of creating companies that can outcompete American companies, no matter where American companies are located. Instead of bringing that production back home, which would require what? It would require a purpose-driven policy, an education system that is purpose-driven, not profit-driven. Who can go to college and get an education and not spend the next 10 years of their life in debt? You don't do that here in Asia where I live. There's places in Europe you don't do that. In Russia, you don't do that. You can go and get an education and then start building your life without having to spend the rest of your life in debt. In America, that is not possible. Why is that not possible? So people are conflating my criticisms of US policy with just in general hating America. I am American. I have family who are still in America. I have friends who are in America. Scott is in America. Scott is my friend. So no, I don't hate America. That is a cheap cop-out to try to rationalize why I'm saying things that disagree with the fantasies you want to believe in. That's why you think that I hate America. That's why you need me to hate America.
And then just to follow up, he said, why do you all get angrier as peace gets closer then? And my response is, why do you think peace is close? What makes you think that there's going to be a peace sometime soon? Because Trump said so? Because there's some entry-level talks between the Russian Federation and the United States. I mean, listen to what they're saying. They want European defense spending to increase. They want Europe to take over the Ukraine project. They want to pivot. There is no peace coming. Peace, if they wanted to have peace, they would just revoke intelligence and military aid, and it would be over in a couple of weeks. If they wanted to go that way. And they could put a lot of pressure on Zelensky by doing that, by withholding intelligence, by withholding shells. I mean, where do you think Ukraine gets all of their stuff from? They're not producing it, right? So if the U.S. wanted to put the pressure on Ukraine to end the conflict, they could do it like that. Again, you're watching theater. You're watching grown adult men who are leaders of multi-billion-dollar nations catfighting in front of cameras. That's what you're watching. It's not real. It's not policy. It's just kind of cheap entertainment. It's just a distraction. Did you want to get to some of these questions, Brian?
Yes. Well, just like you say, peace is not getting closer. The reason maybe we seem upset is because the U.S. government, as it always does, is lying, and people are buying these lies because they've changed the face and the tone of the lies, or the people telling the lies, and so now people are buying into it. We have been following this for a very long time. I have been following this since I was in the U.S. Marines, all the way back from 2000 to 2003. And then I've been following it ever since the U.S. lied about WMDs in Iraq and then invaded Iraq. I saw someone saying, Brian, you never criticized all the horrible things about Russia and China. Who told you about these horrible things? The same people who told you there were WMDs in Iraq. I've been to China. I live in Asia. I have many Chinese friends as well. It's not what you're being told. As a matter of fact, you can go to China visa-free and go see for yourself. Go do that and then come back and tell me how horrible China is. I think you'd be shocked and dismayed all the progress China has made and all the progress America could have made working together with China rather than trying to subordinate China, which has been over a century-old ambition of the U.S. and before that, the British Empire. And so now peace is not coming, and we're warning you that it isn't coming, just like it wasn't coming during Minsk I or Minsk II or during Istanbul or any of these junctures where the U.S. has it wasn't at the cusp when Hillary Clinton was sitting there with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov pushing the reset button. Wasn't coming then, and we were warning you that it wasn't coming, and you didn't listen because emotionally you wanted to believe that it was. That's not us getting angry. That is delusion, and not on our part.
Have we got angry at all? I don't feel any anger regularly about
frustration. I'm frustrated because it's so obvious, and it's frustrated over and over again.
But not frustrated at the people doing it, really, even because to me, that's just so far. To me, it's the people who see it and can't put it together logically. That's the problem I have. All right, let's get to some of these questions or statements. We have witnessed today an episode of The Apprentice where Trump fired an employee who is disagreeing with him. It's all bread and circus.
You know what you should do? Type in Trump, type in Apprentice best moments, and you just compare the two. And also type in Trump and WWE and compare it.
This is something that I actually give Trump credit for. Of all of the politicians I have ever seen in my life, the Trump derangement syndrome, it's real, but it's real on both sides. It's real for the people who buy everything he says, and it's real for the people who hate him for the stupidest reasons. I mean, hate him for the right reasons, but don't hate him for the wrong reasons. And that's it. I've never seen somebody who is so capable of just ripping emotion out of people everywhere he goes.
Yes.
On TV, his Twitter, everything. He is the most polarizing and emotionally inducing human being I think I've ever seen. And this is just a perfect example. All of today is just a perfect example of that. Let's see. Meeting in the White House was insane, hard to watch. Yeah, it was. And honestly, I think some of it's real. I think that Zelensky and Trump don't particularly get along. I think that a lot of world leaders don't particularly get along. I think it takes a certain kind of individual to become a world leader just to begin with. And then on top, or a leader of a country to begin with. And then on top of that, those individuals getting along in the same room together for very long. It's a more difficult thing to ask for. Here to say F Zelensky. Okay. Hating Zelensky. Estonia isn't a country. I think this is when I was talking about security guarantees, which is, I mean, they definitely act like they're the most important countries in the EU. So will Europe step in and fill the void by the U.S., or will Ukraine continue to struggle to the bitter end, I guess, alone? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Europe is already doing it. They already announced that they're doing it. They're allotting this money, and they're going to go ahead and do it. And the U.S. is going to send them weapons, whatever they can spare. There's a lot of weapons that the U.S. makes that they're not going to be using in Asia Pacific. So they're going to continue sending this. You just won't send it through Ukraine. This is to appease the support base and Americans. And if people, they just want to hear and believe what they want to believe. I sit there and I listen to 3-hour Senate hearings where they talk about all of this every single week, just about. And they were talking about how Americans are upset that their tax dollars are disappearing into the black hole that is Ukraine, the mineral deal, and other ways of sloshing the money and weapons around could quiet the Americans, make them stop complaining. That's all they're trying to do, is get you to stop complaining so they can continue doing what they're doing.
Yeah, and I mean, you saw it today. There was a blanket tweet I posted on my Telegram. It was the same tweet 4 times from Ursula von der Leyen. They all just copy pasted the same memo, which, again, if you had to look at this and go, I wonder what's going on, you think the planned group message that they all tweeted out at the same time in support of Zelensky was just some random thing that they all did? No, it's all orchestrated to some degree. Obviously, there's going to be internal conflict. There's going to be disagreements, but the general consensus is the same. Could this be the most devilishly orchestrated show from the 2019 rigged election of Zelensky as president and the subsequent war to the androcide of Ukraine?
I was just talking to Scott before the show started about a BBC piece. I forget let's see, what day was this? What year was this from? 2019. And the BBC was talking about, it's titled, you can look this up on YouTube, The Comedian Who Could Be President, BBC News. And they're talking about how he was this actor who played in a movie where he was a teacher who became president. And they said in the BBC piece that they're trying to channel that to appeal to voters, to give voters what they want emotionally, not actually give it to them, because that's not what Zelensky ultimately did he? It was a bait and switch. He said he was going to end the war. There was going to be peace. And I remember many people falling for Zelensky back then, real smart analysts. They all thought Zelensky was going to talk with Russia and end everything. And all he ended up doing was making the Ukrainian people shut up, stay quiet while the proxy war continued inching forward. That's all he did. And now look at the end result. So, I mean, if you want to believe this is the first time in history the U.S. is telling the truth and picking peace over primacy, you're entitled to do that, but you're going to be wrong.
And
almost
I mean,
certainly.
It's so funny too, because there's been like 3 or 4 of these that have happened in this conflict, not
Yes.
previous conflicts. Not, I mean, we're talking Minsk 1, Minsk 2, and Istanbul, right? That's 3 negotiations that were completely destroyed or agreed upon and then not followed by the West. So, I mean,
and during the first Trump administration, he also broke deals made with Russia, arms control treaties that he lied about in order to unilaterally leave. So now you believe suddenly somehow he has changed. Why? Why do you believe that? Because you want to, or because there's evidence to suggest otherwise?
Because you want to. That's what I found every time. It's just people want something to be true more than it is. Let's imagine USA plus Russia become allies. You can try, but the The U.S. does not want another ally. It wants another vassal. It wants a broken Russia.
I've had people tell me, Brian, if you're negative like this, it's going to manifest in negative consequences. But really what I'm doing is I'm warning people that the U.S. is once again lying. And if the U.S. is lying, then they're going to lie and they're going to betray all of their agreements, just as they always do, whether you believe in it or not. By believing their lies, it's not going to somehow, touch their heart and make them change their mind about lying.
No, you're just being negative, Brian.
That's right.
Even just saying you're being negative, it's adding an emotional element that just isn't there from us. We aren't being negative. We're just saying what we see. Like it's not an emotional thing.
Yes, Scott, I always tell people all the time, you have to follow the truth, no matter where it takes you and no matter how uncomfortable it makes you, because the truth more times than not is going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be something you don't want to accept. The fact that Syria collapsed and there was nothing Russia or Iran could do, that was a reality. And people chose to ignore that reality. And I remember people all the way up until the very end swearing that Syria wasn't collapsing, everything was fine. Remember October 7th
is coming.
Remember October 7th, 2023, everybody was excited about Hamas. I remember a certain pundit, I won't name them, but he was screaming about how Israel was done. Fast forward a year later, how did that all work out for the region? Is Israel done, or is Hezbollah's senior leadership done? Is Syria done? Is Gaza flattened? I think that's what happened. And if people remember, I warned people then. And I heard all of these same arguments. I'm negative. I'm wrong. I'm a Zionist shill. I was analyzing without emotions the facts before me. And that's what they pointed toward.
And it wasn't particularly hard. You saw basically the maximum offensive capability of Hamas on October 7th. And then what was the equation after that? 2,000-pound JDAMs falling on every building in Gaza. I mean, it's not, the math is there. You just have to be willing to do it. I listened to Danny Davis today. He thinks this meeting is a casus belli for the U.S. pullout from the conflict. I think that he is probably right, but wrong in his explanation and where he thinks that's going to go. I do think the U.S. is trying to pivot. I wouldn't say pull out, but pivot. And so, I mean, he's not wrong. I think this was a show. I think it could very easily be used to that end. But I think that he's wrong in that he feels that the U.S. is abandoning Ukraine. Ukraine was always supposed to kind of be abandoned. So to say that the U.S. is using this as just a way to escape all of this, I think is foolish. They're using this as a way to transition this to the next phase of the conflict.
And shift responsibility to Europe, just as Secretary Hegseth publicly said. I don't know why people ignore that.
As they said out loud. I mean, we're not making it up. Once the men are gone, the women. Okay, I don't know what you're talking about there, but maybe you're talking about Ukraine. Trump is better than Biden. Is he?
I mean, it's up to who you prefer to tell you the lies and which lies you prefer over the others.
He's more entertaining.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He doesn't get lost when he tries to walk away from the podium.
Yep.
That's a plus.
I feel that Trump is slightly better because he has less control over his filter. So when Biden says things, it felt like he was just on a narrative reading a script all the time. When Trump says stuff, I feel like it's more off the cuff, and you get statements like the Javelin statement, which is a massive omission of what the U.S. is doing and what the U.S. has planned. So I think I personally like Trump a little bit more just because he is less restricted in how he's allowed to talk. How can Americans be stopped? Nuclear weapons? Americans can be stopped by the American people understanding what their government is doing and not just being very content with being in a very rich country.
Also,
think
the
that's
incremental construction of multipolarism is meant to create alternatives to the international order controlled by the US and eventually transition power away from the US unilaterally to multiple nations, multilateral multipolarism. That's why they call it multipolarism. And that's why the US is so desperate, including President Trump, to stop it. He openly vowed to crush BRICS if they create alternatives to the US dollar. Does that sound like a guy who's ready to make peace and join the multipolar table? No. Come on.
Like if you think Aiden should be our Secretary of Defense, I would be killed immediately. I'd be removed.
Yes, you would.
I would be removed like that. Man, if they sat me down and they said, this is what we're doing, I'd be like, but why? Not that I don't get the whole maintaining hegemony and being the best in the world. Like, I understand that kind of, but I would look at them and I would go, this doesn't make any sense. We're going to lose if we do this. And then they would get rid of me instantly. So, keep your chin up and your head down. Love your work, Vancouver, Canada. Thank you, Terry. Appreciate that. So will half of Ukraine become the 54th U.S. state? I don't know what the 51st, 52nd, 53rd are. I'd be interested. Maybe Greenland, Canada, and Israel. But do you think that the U.S. is going to have a permanent investment in Ukraine after this?
I don't know. I mean, the plan is to burn Ukraine to the ground and fight to the last Ukrainian. So I'm not really sure what future they envision. They would like to create a buffer zone and freeze it, and whatever they build in there, maybe.
There it is. That's the 51 Canada, 52 Greenland, 53 Gaza. Okay, Gaza. Ask if Brian hates America, because as peace comes closer in Ukraine, as Trump is setting up to abandon them, he gets more and more hostile. Again, you're just assuming that Trump is going to abandon Ukraine. You just assume that this isn't.
And you're ignoring Secretary Hegset's division of labor plan. He laid it out. He said, we're going to China and Europe. You have to double down on Ukraine. That's not peace coming closer, and that's not the U.S. abandoning Ukraine. That's a division of labor, literally verbatim what Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said. So please, please keep insulting me, condemning me, as long as you're giving Scott financial support. I'm all for it.
I don't get it, because you haven't said anything negative about Americans, about Americans, culture, yes, about America. Exactly. The only thing he said negative things about is American foreign policy and American leadership, which yes. I'm sorry if you love Trump that much that you just can't possibly believe that he would do anything wrong. Yeah.
I mean, is President Trump above criticism to these people? I wonder, because I'm only doing what I've done all along. And all of these same people were more than happy to listen to me for 4 years when I condemned everything taking place under the Biden administration. And now that it's their guy, they don't want to hear any sort of criticism or concerns or questions about their guy. And that's not rational, and that's not being honest. That's being tribal, and that is lining up behind your guy no matter what he says or does, which is what Biden supporters did, and what Obama supporters did too for 8 years.
And then he says, when Trump pulls the rug, will you admit that you were wrong? I will, if Europe doesn't step in and do exactly what we've been saying this entire live stream. If Europe doesn't take up that mantle and take care of Ukraine, let's just say the Russians just steamroll Ukraine from here on out. Yeah, I'll admit that I was wrong and that there might not have been some grand plan for Ukraine and Europe and all of that. But the way it looks right now is that Europe is going to take over that mantle. And so you can say that Trump is pulling the rug, but when the plan the entire time was to pull that rug eventually, it's going along with the plan. It's not deviating and doing some wild out of the outlier tactic to try to get this to wrap up. So we'll see. And yes, I will admit if I was wrong. Saddam went from Yankee hero to 0 to same deal. Yep. That is
They murdered
the
him.
exact same.
Murdered him and his family. Yeah.
We gave them a lot of weapons and stuff, right? To fight the Iranians?
Including chemical weapons.
Yep. The WMDs we gave them, and then
and then when they got rid of them, they're like, hey, they still have them.
This is something that I was actually going to ask you about, and I forgot. Lindsey Graham changing his views on Ukraine. I thought that this was funny just because this has been the most bloodthirsty pro-Ukrainian neocon in the entire establishment, even before the war started. This guy was drooling for this war to start. And as soon as this happened in the Oval Office, he instantly brown-nosed Trump and turned his back on all of Ukraine very, very quickly.
Well, do you think that's because Lindsey Graham has changed who he is fundamentally, or because he realizes what the plan is and he's going along with it because he knows this is how we're going to continue this confrontation with Russia? The very fact that the U.S. is openly saying that it wants to pursue the exact same type of conflict with China tells you that nothing has fundamentally changed. They have lost the proxy war in Ukraine, and they have to react to that reality. And them doing that does not mean they are sorry for it. It doesn't mean that they seek reform or friendship with Russia. They have to acknowledge it, and they have to salvage it the best way possible. If they could trick the Russians into a disadvantageous peace for Russia, that's all the more bonus for them.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I am going to be extremely critical if the Russians accept something that just doesn't bode well for them. Even if they're overextended at this point, I just still can't understand signing an agreement that doesn't, that just, it's going to not work out for you in the end. Is this Trump's newest apprentice show, a Z? It seems like it. It's very, very similar. Estonia has the GDP of Boise, Idaho. That's probably true. I think Boise, Idaho's GDP is probably wildly inflated too, but let's see. Look how Trump and JD Vance did it today. Can Putin one day speak up like that? Why? Why? He says exactly what he plans to do. Show some anger. Trump and JD Vance. I don't know. When I look at it, it looked like a clown show to me. Like, that's how you're conducting your diplomacy. Have those conversations in private and then come out smiling together and be cheesy. Yes. Like, yes. I don't get doing that in front of everybody. I think it makes you look very bad. Even if it is part of your overarching plan, I don't think it's the proper technique of going about it. So no, I really hope Putin doesn't start acting like that. And as a dictator, I would consider him, he's been in office for 25 years. As that person in that position, him getting angry and slamming the desk and being as close to the mustache man as he could possibly be doesn't aid in his situation at all. He's calm, he's cool, he's calculated, he's winning a war. And again, the whole time that the West is over there arguing with each other and trying to figure out how to go about winning this thing, Putin is just sitting quietly watching. The Kremlin is just sitting quietly watching, and I hope that they're paying very, 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 very close attention. Let's see. I don't know. America clearly wants to maintain power, no doubt about it, but I think there is genuinely a popularist right movement in the U.S. that wants out of the globalist left NWO project. Yeah, there might be a popularist movement, but do they have a say in anything? Go ahead, Brian.
Also, globalist left New World Order project. This is how they've got you, because they've convinced you that it's globalist and leftist, which is just branding.
Yep.
And if you look at the special interests that actually drive U.S. policy at home and abroad, arms manufacturers, oil companies, big ag, big pharma, all of these corporations, they're the ones that pay for the candidates on both sides of the aisle when they go run for office. They give money to both sides. They control both sides. They are all funding these think tanks together to reach a consensus to then get the people in Washington to sign off on these policies. So this left-leaning globalist project, and just outright American hegemony, there really is no difference when you strip it of its rhetoric and the ideological trappings. It is just hegemony. It is just primacy. And they're using it to appeal to different groups of people and to move it through from one juncture to the next. And when it doesn't work anymore, just like a snake, it's going to shed its skin and it's going to keep crawling forward. And that's what this is all doing. So people can want half of one thing to end, but if you're only wanting half of it to end, the other half is still going to continue. That's how they've got you. They divide you between left and right.
Yeah, and I would just think about it the same way we just talked about Zelensky in 2019 being the peace candidate. He was the alternative, right? Just like Trump is the alternative. Sometimes you need change. Sometimes you need a fresh position to manipulate an audience from. If they went back to the Biden nonsense, you think the American people are going to keep buying it? No,
exactly.
They
need a new narrative.
There has to be a change, but is there really a change? We will see. Me and Brian are of the opinion, no, there will not be a change. Let's see. Watched Brian Berletic for 3 years. He's been histrionic lately.
Yes. Well, that's okay. You can keep calling me names. Just keep giving Scott money. Thank you.
As a Ukrainian, I imagine I'm a bit emotional because 1 million boys died. Love you, bro. That is the right person to be emotional. This is the correct individual who should have some emotional connection to all of this. His countrymen are being slaughtered. He has a immediate connection to this war. This is somebody who should be emotional. Now, I hope that he's not emotional when it comes to the aggregate thinking about the war, but I can understand being emotional. If a million Americans died, I would also probably be emotional about that. So I fully understand that. Ask Brian if he and the Duran guys will ever make up with Ritter. Gonzalo.
No, Ritter is dead to me. Ritter is as dead to me as Gonzalo Lira is. He made the conscious decision to deliberately lie about Gonzalo Lira, use his influence to hurt Gonzalo Lira, and because they were having an argument, and he was angry because Gonzalo Lira talked about Scott Ritter's legal past. And if you don't know about it, go look it up. It happened. It's real. It's reality. And Scott Ritter should have just put that aside, put his emotions aside, and said, look, I might not like this guy. We had our arguments together, but this guy is going to get killed in jail by the Ukrainians. I have a huge platform. I have influence. I can make a difference. I'm going to be the better man. And if it happened to Ritter, even though I said he's dead to me, if it happened to Ritter, I would take my platform and I would go and help him if he needed help. He doesn't need help because he has so much such a following, which, is kind of, think about that. And think about the things that he has said since then. How many things has he been wrong about? Look at what he was saying in the weeks up to Syria's collapse. Look at what he said following October 7th. So, somebody's track record does matter. I think I would put my track record up against his any day of the week. And so no, I have no reason to make up with Scott. The Duran can do whatever they want. And I would never hold it against them if they decided to invite Scott Ritter back onto their show. I go on to other people's shows that have Scott Ritter on. I don't care. I don't care about that. But Scott Ritter himself, if he were to apologize and ask for forgiveness, okay, yes, sure. But he hasn't, and he won't, because that's his character.
Yeah, and it's the aspect for me. Well, first off, Gonzalo was still alive when he was saying that stuff in prison in a country that he has, for the entire time he's been talking. He has been ripping into Ukraine and Kiev. Yes. It doesn't matter.
Ill-advised.
It doesn't matter who got arrested. The fact that you're now calling somebody who has also been going against the Ukrainian government the entire time inside of Ukraine, an SBU agent or a ploy or something like that. It was horrible. And then for him to die on the back of that and have it be, it was really bad. And not only that, just put all of that aside. For me personally, Scott Ritter he's very bombastic about his claims, and he has been incredibly wrong a lot of the time throughout the conflict. I don't understand why there's this ability for people just to memory hole when large accounts or individuals are regularly wrong. It's just that they are able to get you emotionally invested, so you keep buying into them.
He's pandering. He's pandering to people. He's telling them what they want to hear.
If I said the things that he said on my Twitter account, I would be in David D's category of reliability and trustworthiness. I would be getting roasted. David D. I would be getting roasted 24/7 in my comments and stuff because of those claims and posts. Man, I have been wrong a few select times, and I still get grilled over that stuff. But he said, I mean, just the fact that he was saying that there was like 1.2 million dead Ukrainians in like 2023, it was just ridiculous stuff. So yeah, I never had the same like communication with him or anything, but yeah. Thank you for understanding. That was the Ukrainian 1 million men dead or gone.
I'll be honest with you. When I watch these videos from the battlefield, I'm not just upset when I see Russians dying. I'm genuinely upset when I see Ukrainians dying, unless they're Nazis. But even then, those people were manipulated, a lot of them since they were teenagers. Children. So can you really blame them? And I have kids, and I could just imagine how horrible it would be to see your son blown in half by a drone drop to heavy metal music and people clicking the smiley face on it. It would destroy you for eternity. Yeah. Until the end of time, it would destroy you. And I don't see anything good about any of this. I want it to stop, but just like Scott said, we want it to really stop. We don't want smoke and mirrors, and for the U.S. to kick the can down the road and kill even more people the next round of aggression they're already setting up. Look at what the Trump administration has promised to do. They are going to expand the military-industrial base. Why? If you want peace and you want multipolarism, what do you need this? You already have an enormous military, enough nukes to destroy the planet 10 times over. What do you need more weapons for? Because they've got future proxy wars they need to fight and win.
Yeah. All right, Brian. That takes us to it takes us to an hour and 12 minutes, man. We've been grinding this out. I think we covered the topic today pretty well. Anything else you want to throw in? Anything you want to share with the audience before we get out of here?
Well, just again, if you're having doubts about what is being said regarding Ukraine, just look at what current U.S. policy coming out of the Trump administration is towards China in the Asia-Pacific region. The U.S. has tens of thousands of troops closer to China than to America's own shores. They have no right to be there. They are violating and still under the Trump administration backtracking from their own one China policy that they made together with Beijing back in the 1970s. Under Secretary Rubio's State Department, they have edited the U.S.-Taiwan relations page on their website. They have stricken the sentence that says we do not recognize Taiwan independence because they're preparing to do to China via either Taiwan, which is an island province of China, by the way, look it up, or the Philippines. They're planning to do the exact same thing vis-a-vis China that they're pretending they want to end with Russia in Ukraine. So does that sound like genuine interest in change? Or you need smoke and mirrors, you need to buy time because you lost your proxy war and you have an even bigger war. You still have no idea how you're going to fight and win, but you're still determined to do it anyway. Think on that.
Yeah, no, and again, as always, Brian, I have you on because I agree with what you say, and I appreciate how you deliver it to my audience. Thank you so much for coming on. Everybody, if you would like to follow Brian at The New Atlas, you can find the link in the description of this video. And at his page, you can find all of his social medias and where to find his work. Please, I implore you, go read Brian. He is a daily source for me. I really appreciate all that he does, all of the in-depth analysis and research that he does that I honestly don't find myself having the time to do. I get a good chunk of that condensed and properly distributed to my Telegram page every day. So thank you, Brian, for that. And thank you
you.
everybody who was in here talking, asking questions, everything. Go ahead, Brian.
No, I was just going to say thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And be sure to tune in to Brian's shows. Be sure to tune in to our streams when we do them together. Until next time, everybody, thank you so much. And we will see you later. Goodbye.